We're now excited to take a deep dive into the world of artificial intelligence with MIT's Daniela Rus and Stanford's Mehran Sahami. Daniela is a MacArthur Fellow at MIT's Director of Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. Her research interests are in robotics, AI, and machine learning, and their applications toward a better world. She's written a book that's coming out next year. It's called The Mind's Mirror. Mehran Sahami is the chair of the Computer Science Department at Stanford University. He was a senior research scientist at Google for a decade. Mehran's research interests include computer science education, AI, and ethics. He also has an upcoming book called System Error: Where Big Tech Went Wrong and How Can We Reboot. Welcome, Daniela and Mehran. Welcome. Hi, welcome. Have a seat.
Thank you.
Morning. All right. Well, we have been eagerly anticipating you guys coming here to bring your wisdom. Mehran's flown in from Stanford. Daniela's come all the way across the country for this conversation, so thank you for your time. Tell us why we shouldn't be terrified of AI.
Well, so you shouldn't be terrified of AI. Let me elaborate. We have great inspiration from movies. In fact, AI researchers look towards your field to find inspiration. And we find great joy in turning the impossible into possible, going from science fiction to science and then reality. But at the same time, the techniques that we have developed through this process are really not that powerful. And I know that
they're not that powerful?
They're not that powerful. They cannot replace the human creativity. They are not our equals. They could be our assistants. They could empower us to do more with what we can do already. They can help us be more productive. They can help us with knowledge. They can help us with insight, with creativity, with foresight, with mastery, with empathy. So we can get helpers, but the tools themselves are kind of simple tools that work based on statistics rules. The ideas were invented decades ago, and these ideas now work because they're enhanced by a lot of data and a lot of computation.
Okay, I don't want to be a devil's advocate, but I mean, everything we're reading since ChatGPT came out has been about the dangers and the risks posed by AI. And so, you know, if I didn't know you were just at a cocktail party and I hadn't heard about AI every single day in the news, I might say, oh, that's good to know. But everything that, all the inputs we're getting are, this is, and we're all using ChatGPT anyway, even though it's imperfect, but you know, that this is a technology that improves as it goes. I mean, all technology improves, but learns more and corrects itself and gets stronger and stronger every time you use it. And so it's right. I mean, it sounds like maybe you're downplaying the risks, or you really believe that?
In fact, let me say that AI can give us a lot of benefits, but the same benefits can empower supervillains. And so we really have to be worried about that. We also have to consider the economic and the social implications that AI brings to the world. And there are some real issues that are important and we need to think about. Will AI take over your job? Well, AI is good at some tasks, but it's not good at jobs. And so you can think of AI and you can think about especially the language components and the computer vision components as providing new capabilities, as empowering you to do more. But in terms of dominating the human creativity, we are not there. And in fact, a recent study by the Boston Consulting Group has looked at how AI can help with creativity in design. And so people were given GPT-4, and the study was, well, can you be more creative or not using this tool? Interestingly, individuals were a little bit more creative with GPT-4, but when you look at teams, at groups of individuals using the tool or not using the tool, the results were very interesting. because the results were that the team working without the use of GPT-4 was much more creative, generated a wider, more diverse set of ideas. And that is because the team using GPT-4 essentially got the same variation on the same themes. So yes, you can get some help, but you can get the average of the information that is stored out there. And
not like a new idea. I want to bring Mehran in because you mentioned to me last night that Sam Altman, who's the creator of ChatGPT, was your student.
He was a former student, and so that's one of the things I would say when you say, should we be terrified of AI? What I would say is AI is just a technology, which you should be not necessarily terrified, but concerned about are who wields the power of AI. They're making decisions. And I'll give you an example, right, where we talk about things like job displacement. We talk about what is the impact of AI on the economy. In January, I was at a conference. We're on the drive from the airport to the conference. I'm sitting in the car with someone who's a consultant to the publishing industry. And she talks about how in the publishing industry, she was talking with a group of companies who saw the impact of technologies like ChatGPT and said, this can make our editors more productive. So we're actually going to go after more titles, hire the same number of people, but go after more titles, more creative work. 6 months later, another conference, I happened to be talking to someone also in the publishing industry. She says, yeah, we just had 6 open requisitions that were canceled because we see the existing staff that we have can do the same work using AI technology. So it was not AI that makes the decision whether or not the jobs exist or not. It's human beings that make that decision, and different people can make different decisions. So what AI enables is more possibilities, more creativity. It also, one of those possibilities that it creates is job displacement. But people ultimately make that decision. And so that's one of the things we need to be aware of, is this is going to shift the economic landscape, but the decisions are still ours to make.
Okay, well, those are two different things. If we're talking about, and I want to go back to that with Daniela, as to whether machines can do human-like thinking or work better, actually, than humans. But that is a very stark reality that you're talking about, which is inevitably it will lead to a reduction in the number of jobs available. I mean, is that wrong?
It can, and so the question is, how do we respond to that, right? So there's AI.
Well, we're not going to. If I'm running a company and I'm responsible for the stock price and the share price at the end of the quarter, it's not like it's a decision. I'm losing jobs. You're like, yay! I can save X amount of money by eliminating those 6 jobs. That's like that.
Well,
we know what will happen.
That's one way to think about it. Another way you could think about it is I could generate, say, 40% more revenue with the same number of people, right? And so that's a business decision you have to make. And so part of it's understanding what is the impact that AI is going to have on your business itself. Can you actually generate more revenue? For many businesses, that will be true. For some, it may not be.
Can you talk about also what you mentioned last night, which is that whether the people who have created these tools, Sam Altman is someone you know, have thought through the ethical implications of what they've created?
So most of the people I know who work in this space are thoughtful people. They are not supervillains. They're not out there to say
nobody thinks they're supervillains, Mehran,
but
I mean,
they're reasonable people. But at the same time, I mean, if you look at the effects of ChatGPT, one of the things that happens with a lot of technologies is technologies are developed, they're put out there, and society bears the brunt of what that technology does before it's ready for it. Let me give you a simple example. There's been lots of surveys now. A whole bunch of students you may know if you have children cheat using things like ChatGPT in schools. Was this thought through before language models were made readily available to the public? Probably not. So what we actually get is technology is developed. It has a ton of implications. Not all of those implications can be thought through, but we could do a better job of thinking about them before we release them. But society bears the brunt of the impact of that technology, and it may do it before it's ready. So that's where we've gotten into in this moment, where AI technologies, as Daniela said, have existed for decades. But the moment that we've gotten into in the last few years is these power tools have been put in the hands of consumers in a way that they were not available before. That's created this awakening to say what these tools can do.
Do you think that's a bad idea?
In some sectors it is. So in terms of, we have an election coming up, in terms of the amount of information and the disinformation and misinformation that can be generated by these tools, it is large. In terms of trying to build tools to mitigate that misinformation, we are behind. Many of the big tech companies have actually disbanded their responsible computing teams. So you see these disconnects that are happening out there. And you
but I'm sorry, just to pause there. They what?
They've disbanded or they've greatly reduced the headcount in their responsible computing teams.
And the reason for that I mean, I know why Elon Musk did it, because he's a crazy person, but
Well, it's cost savings, right? These are human decisions. That's what it ultimately comes down to, is as a society, as
so
business
as they're
leaders,
creating these tools that have more power than we've ever seen before, they've decided the cost savings are going to go for, and by the way, all of these companies make billions of dollars in profit every quarter. They're going to reduce their corporate responsibility. You're not responsible for that. I'm just pointing it out. That seems insane to me.
So,
Well,
yeah.
but I would say that the research community is not giving up. In fact, there is an very energized movement to think about what we say is alignment, to think about human values and ensure the algorithms that get deployed are aligned with the human values. And in many ways, we have technical solutions for some problems. We're worried about bias. Well, we have technical solutions to debias
Tell us
machine
more
learning.
about bias. Tell us more about where that appears, how that appears, if you're...
Well, bias appears because bias exists in the data we use to train machine learning. And the performance of a machine learning engine is only as good as the data that's used to train it. And so if you have bias in the data that's used to train it, then you're going to have bias in the output. So if you're trying to do something with faces, if you have mostly white blonde faces, then the system is going to produce mostly white blonde outcome. But you can actually mathematically rebalance the data. So you can mathematically evaluate whether the system as a whole has bias in it, and then you can fix it using mathematics, using wrappers that are readily available now.
So it's interesting. Mehran, when we were talking earlier, you had talked about this same issue and talked about whether, like, who can get insurance, where generative AI is being used as an efficiency. I think you were tell us a story about the resume, Amazon
Right.
screening resumes, which I thought was very interesting.
So a few years back, Amazon, which gets an enormous number of resumes, built a machine learning system to screen resumes to determine who should get interviews. And what they found, to their credit, they tested this out in the lab before they fully deployed it at scale, that it was making sexist decisions. And it was making them in subtle ways, right? So it was looking for things like the names of all women's colleges on a resume, or the difference between softball versus baseball on a resume.
To downgrade those
down,
applicants?
So women's resumes were getting downgraded.
But why would that even be
Because
a thing?
the historical data, right, most of their workforce into the tech sector is male, right? So you get data that's imbalanced, and when you put imbalanced data into a machine learning system, you get an imbalanced output.
But the good news is that now we have techniques to remove that imbalance and to make
Most
those
of the time.
systems better, more
Are we
fair.
supposed to trust Amazon to do
Well,
that?
so
or?
the
No.
end of the Amazon story was they actually couldn't do it, right? So they tried, they're a very technologically sophisticated company. They tried to get the bias out of the system, they could not. To their credit, they pulled the system. They disbanded the team and pulled the system.
Okay,
but I
but
think
just to-
Daniela's right. There are methods that you can try.
Well,
In
she
some
just said
cases
there are
they work.
methods to fix it, and you just said Amazon couldn't fix it.
Sometimes you can fix it, sometimes you can't.
Ah,
That's
okay.
that's the reality of the world.
Yeah,
Well-
I mean, I don't think any of us want perfection, but we just would like not to be replaced by machines. But let's talk about some, because you build robots, right?
Yes.
Yeah, she builds robots. I think that's super cool.
And their brains,
And their brains?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well,
I'm sorry, but what does that mean?
So a robot is a machine, and this machine has a body. The body defines what kinds of physical tasks this machine will be able to do. But the body without a brain is just a mechanism. And so in order to get the body to deliver on its capabilities, you need the programs, you need the suite of algorithms
Sure.
that we call the robot's brain that controls the robot. So a machine is really a
Do
combination
you build
of
like
body
little
and brain.
robots, like little Roomba things, or do you build like big robots?
Well, let's see. So I am interested in expanding our view of what a robot is. So I might turn this chair into a robot, or I might turn your jacket into a robot to help you with your posture. So our robots are quite varied. They go beyond what we typically think about as robots. Most of the machines that we consider robots today are inspired by the human form. They are either humanoids, or there are arms, or maybe we have boxes on wheels. But nature and the built environment comes in so many more shapes, and there are so many extraordinary materials that we can use to build machines that are actually friendly and helpful and that can empower us. They can remove some aspects of our physical work for us.
I wanted to pick up on something you said earlier. You said that we're not there yet in terms of machines being able to replace humans, or they're here more now. They're good for enabling or improving maybe productivity or efficiency or supporting creativity. But where we are today, I think that's the whole point, is not where we'll be in 6 months from now, because the pace of technological change is one of the defining characteristics of technological change is this exponential speed at which it creates change. So let's talk about what the next few years look like. Isn't that coming inevitably?
Well, let's see. So let me say that the great progress we see today is due to scaling up of methods that are decades old. And there's only so much you can do by scaling up and by essentially using more and more data and building larger and larger systems that operate in very simple ways. For text generation, these systems operate by simply trying to predict the next word. Mm-hmm. And the way they're trained is you have this massive, you can think of it as a massive neural graph, and you give it all the text that exists out there in the world, and then you take sentences, you remove words in a sentence, and you try to get the system to predict the word that you have removed. And you do this over and over and over again for every sentence that is out there, and that's how these systems are trained. And so this kind of statistical next word prediction can only do so much. Now, I believe that we need different methods. We need fresh ideas to think about the intelligence of the tools that we develop, because otherwise everyone will continue to do the same simple process, and pretty soon everything will be incremental, and the results will be primarily the average of whatever you use to train the machine learning engine. So and
there'll be similarity too across other people's results.
That's right.
Yeah.
And besides that, we don't really understand how these huge models work. Nobody understands, and it's hard to predict where they will be in some time. And there are other issues. So they're too big. That means that they have a big impact on climate, and they're black boxes. We don't understand what's happening inside. They need a lot of data. We really need to, the scientific community needs to get a hold of these questions and really understand and figure out how to bake safety and how to bake other values that are important for deployment. And this is actually happening. That there is work that is on its way to bringing new insights.
Right, but the problem is that a capitalist system, which we have, is going to grab whatever can be monetizable and race it to market, while academics, and I'm not saying you guys are slow, because the things you've done are extraordinary. We want our academics to be deliberate, and take their time and give us, wisdom, and along with great new discoveries. But it's in tension with the way our society works.
Well, I think there is an increased conversation in how we can deploy these extraordinary tools in a safer way, and I think you have a lot to say about that, right?
Ahead.
That's what your book is about.
Yeah, I think the part of the answer is that no one individual has the answer. And so the last few years I've been working with someone who's actually a moral philosopher, someone who's a public policy expert who spent a bunch of time in the Obama White House, and I'm the technologist, and we look at these issues through a multifaceted lens. And part of it, what it really comes down...
That's the book?
That's the book. It's called System Error. I'll put in the plug, System Error, Where Big Tech Went Wrong and How We Can Reboot. It came based on teaching a class for 5 years.
You can't buy it now.
Huh?
You
You
can't
can buy
buy-
it now. It's out.
Oh, you can't. Oh, it is out.
Yeah.
That was my mistake. It is out. Sorry.
It's out.
Daniela's book is next year. Sorry.
But what we look at is we try to dissect a bunch of these issues, and one of the issues that we dissect in there is how do we get the effects that we get? It's not just because there's some individual, right? Congress likes to call up a bunch of CEOs for tech companies and sort of put on a parade. Part of our contention is it doesn't matter who's actually at the head of the company. What matters is what are the economic forces that drive these things to happen, and how do we dissect them? And part of it, what it really comes down to is what are the value tensions that are involved when you make these decisions? What's the value tension involved when you think about who owns data? What's the value tension involved when you think about privacy, right? And so most people say, well, privacy is something I want. It's great, right? People should have hands off my data. We say, well, if you want absolute privacy, that means you also want privacy for terrorists and child pornographers. And they're like, whoa, that's not what I said. I said, that's what absolute privacy is. So if that's not what you want, let's actually figure out what you want. So there's a bunch of value tensions that come up. When we think about those value tensions, we think about these are ethical issues. The codification of ethics is our laws. That's where public policy comes
Okay, so that's what I was going to say. So do you believe that we need regulation of
Absolutely.
artificial intelligence? You do.
Absolutely. And the reason why is when we get back
Would you suggest at a federal level, at a state, like,
at
it
both.
has to be federal,
Right now,
right?
California, actually, with the California Consumer Privacy Act, is making some headway. We don't have, for example, federal comprehensive privacy legislation. We don't really have federal legislation with respect to regulating AI. Most of the stuff that's happening now is kind of getting the CEOs to make these kind of highfalutin commitments that don't really have any teeth in them. But what we really need is some real regulation, because at the end of the day, it's a question of who chooses. And who chooses right now is a small group of executives at some very large companies.
Okay, so let's get a little bit more granular about that. Danielle, jump in whenever you like. What kind of regulation do you think we need? You've thought about these issues, and who, I guess Congress would obviously have to do. I suppose you could have an agency, right, an FCC. I don't know what agency, but there's got to be an agency.
Well,
FTC.
right now there isn't an agency. One of the things actually that Sam Altman has suggested, which I actually think is a pretty reasonable idea, sort of the equivalent of an atomic energy agency, but for AI, right?
Okay.
So you think about risk mitigation. You think who has the power tools, what are the risks involved, how do you actually think about putting guardrails and inspections around these things so that they don't fall into nefarious hands, they don't get used for purposes that they weren't intended.
What you said to me last night when we were having dinner, you asked Sam Altman about what he thought were the ethical implications of ChatGPT. Can you share with us what his answer was?
Well, so you think, he tries to think expansively about all these things, and it's not possible to identify what all of the issues are, right? That's one of the things with all
But you said his
technology.
answer was that he wasn't really sure, right?
Well, his answer is that he believes in regulation. He also does believe that Congress should regulate. There is a question around what the regulation should be, and that's where you need to tease it apart, right? As you see CEOs also from a lot of different companies calling for regulation. When regulations are suggested, then you see them begin to create the carve-outs to give them more space than they might otherwise have.
Right.
That's the place we need to be careful.
I think you guys should come up with the regulations. Daniela, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that regulation is a very important and interesting topic. There are some international bodies. So there is a body called Global Partnerships in AI. It's an international group that's where countries have 5 representatives. I'm one of the U.S. representatives in this group, and there are a lot of conversations around what should we do with AI, and when is the right time to inject regulation. I think it's a delicate.
What's your personal view on this? Yeah.
So there is a very delicate balance between regulating something really hard and stifling innovation or enabling innovation. And so I think it's important to find a good balance that allows innovation to continue, that allows the discovery to continue. I mean, especially for our country, we're leaders in the space. If we over-regulate, we may lose our leadership point. But at the same time, the deployments have to be safe. They have to be carefully done, and we have to consider what kind of deployment are we making? Is it a safety-critical deployment or not? For safety-critical deployments, I believe that we really need to ensure consumer confidence in the safety of the output of the system. And for less critical deployments, maybe it's not so important. So I don't really mind if my AI system is not fully tested or makes mistakes if the task is to label my photos, my vacation photos. But if the task is to do something like deciding who gets hired in a company or whether...
Or who gets health insurance.
Or who gets who gets convicted, then we really have to be thoughtful, and that's why
I'm sorry, are
everyone-
we handing our judicial system over to AI?
No,
That's a
we
new
are
one.
not, and nobody's saying that. But what we are saying is that we have these tools that could help us with some data, but ultimately humans have to be in charge.
Give us, if you could, your thoughts about how, about the big fear that we have in our industry about whether AI will ultimately, replace some of these jobs, creative or other. I know it's not your core area, but
I think that there are valid concerns, but there are a lot of misconceptions about the capabilities of AI. And so there are ways in which AI can help the creators to be more powerful, to be more effective. But AI is really just this kind of statistical system that generates the next character or the next aggregate of bits. What I believe is that humans and machines can work together to empower the humans, and so we have to find ways for AI to support the production of movies, and with AI, with these tools, you can eliminate or you can help with some of the routine tasks, like maybe fixing color across the film, or anticipating different types of storylines that the people could then evaluate and decide which are the most telling, the most powerful. Or maybe with AI you can help with error correction as you generate the video. But all of these are really routine tasks. They are really not where the creative element sits. And at best, they could generate maybe B or C scripts, but they cannot generate the kind of stories that capture the important aspects of the human condition, or provide political commentaries. I cannot imagine the Barbie script being generated by a machine. Maybe an individual character could be shaped, but the whole story is necessarily a human story.
well, I'm sure Greta's very relieved to hear that. What do you think?
I do think we're going to see some labor displacement, and it's going to be uneven. And that means
In entertainment as well.
In entertainment as well. And I think one of the issues around creativity is it's true that human creativity is not replaceable in some sense, but human creativity can be augmented, and human creativity with a small group of people who are given a larger set of ideas to work with, that comes back to the question of, is that sufficient? Does that mean we don't need a larger group of creative people? And I'll give you a simple example. A lot of times people say, well, AI doesn't generate anything that hasn't already been generated. A lot of the themes in entertainment, how many movies have been written about love, right? How many movies are essentially the hero cycle, and you can put it in space, you can put it in the Wild West, whatever. There's these universal themes that come up over and over, but they have variations. And so basically they're an amalgam of a bunch of different ideas. And AI can potentially do that. So that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to generate the next great script, but it could generate ideas that empower a smaller group of people to generate the next great script. And then that becomes a question for executives, for studios, for creatives. Are you going to have more people in the room or fewer people with a bunch of power tools? That essentially is a human decision at the end of the day.
And that actually is the trend of what technology has done for us. We have great big combines that, in the Industrial Revolution, that's what happened. There were less physical labor jobs for people, and the service industry's been eliminated pretty much, or in half, because we go to the ATM and we don't go to the bank and see the teller. So it's the same kind of thing, but it's...
So the ATM is actually an interesting story, just to give you a backstory there. Most people think ATMs actually caused a bunch of labor loss in banks. After ATMs came out, actually the number of tellers increased because banks saw that the low-value work could be done by an ATM, but customers actually wanted more high-value work.
Wasn't that a blip, though?
No, it actually played out over the long term. And so there's potential like that with new technology.
I hear that example given a lot, but I would bet that if you sort of took a survey across service industries in general...
And that's what we're going to see. It's going to be very uneven. There's definitely winners and losers. It's not going to be something that affects everyone evenly.
Right.
But we have some time. So we have
How
some
much time, Daniela?
Well, we have some time to help people get adjusted
months?
to the years for sure. And look, I mean, there are tasks that can be automated, but just because it can be automated, it doesn't mean that it makes economic sense to automate the task.
Right.
And so there are economic factors that play in, and the field the adoption is not moving at the pace that people imagine. It's really much slower. And the other thing I wanted to say is that with every new technology, the technology opens opportunities, and these opportunities are difficult to imagine when the technology gets introduced. I mean, some of you may still remember the years 2000s when the world started undergoing the digital transformation. I mean, at that time, nobody was imagining social media. Nobody was imagining cloud computing. Nobody was imagining the smartphone. These all came in 2007, and they generated so many opportunities, not just for technologists, but also for content creators. And so I'm actually very positively, but cautiously positively optimistic about the future. I think that these tools we're building are tools that that are designed by the people for the people, and we can do extraordinary things with them to assist or augment people's capabilities, essentially to amplify what we do. And maybe the idea is that the machines could take on some of the routine tasks with people focused on the more interesting, more cognitive tasks.
I'd love to take some questions. We do have a little bit of time. If there was somebody who had a question, who was first? Okay, can you stand up, please? Tell us who you are and grab the mic. Thank you. Oh, down in front. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Keith. I work at a single-family office here in Los Angeles. In regards to the implications of like long-term for jobs in AI, I've read several studies that have talked about the expectations of AI actually affecting higher-level jobs that are very focused on education and information versus lower-level jobs that are based in, actual like physical jobs, right?
Do you want to start?
Sure. So there's much bigger implications for general artificial intelligence and what that means than just the labor force. I think to think of the smaller question of generative AI, in terms of how that's going to play out, there's still a bunch of things we don't know in the educational space. That's one where we're actually seeing more technology. So things like the Khan Academy Lab School that's in the Bay Area has this tutor called Khanmigo, which is actually very powerful. And as someone who works in education, one of the things I worry about is thinking about who has access to that technology, right? Because right now it's a small group of people, and if that's what happens is this technology gets developed and it gets deployed to a small group of people who have access, who have funding, what we're going to do is exacerbate the gap that we have in education. So the question is, how do we take these kind of technologies and make them more widely available? That's a question of will. That requires lawmakers, when you talk about regulation, to say we need to put investment into making these kind of technologies more readily available to greater numbers of people. So this isn't rocket science. These are things we need to do. There are questions of whether or not our policymakers have the will to actually do them. So education is one. I'll give you a second example. We teach computer scientists. One of the big things a lot of our students wonder is, am I going to get replaced as a programmer because I see now these generative tools can actually create programs as well. And that's one of the things we also talk about with executives at a bunch of companies is, what are you going to do if all of your programmers now are, say, 30% more efficient? Do you hire the same number and have 30% more products, more features, or do you hire 30% less programmers? That question is not yet fully answered by the folks who are making those decisions. I think in the long term, we're actually going to see greater productivity overall. I don't think in certain sectors, like actually the high-tech sector, we're going to see a big labor displacement there. I think people will go after more possibilities, but again, it'll be uneven. That's not going to be true across all sectors.
Well, I just want to add that the MIT studies by a variety of my economist friends show that indeed the chatbots help with writing. You can become more productive. The quality of your writing improves if you use the tools. But that doesn't mean that we should stop teaching people how to write, because teaching communication, teaching how to speak, teaching how to write are really essential in any field. And so I believe that this should be part of any education process. And the other interesting study we have seen from our economists is with respect to code generation. And we have seen that, in fact, the code that the systems are capable of doing is primarily routine code, boilerplate code, because that's what exists in all the training data sets. But the systems do not help you with problem solving. And ultimately, that's where the human value is, figuring out how to solve the problem and then breaking that down. And if some of the coding of the solution can be sped up with machines, great. But ultimately, the essence is problem solving.
We have probably 2 more questions. Yeah, over here.
My question is about the emotional capabilities of AI and where's that going? Because we talk about creativity, and I think that's where it really comes to hit the road. When you look down the road, how much will these technologies allow emotional feeling and emotional response and emotional interactions? Thank you.
Well, just because we have machines that can detect someone's emotional level, which we do now, it doesn't mean that the machine really understands what that means. In fact, it just means that the machine can do pattern recognition. Some humans said, oh, this is a sad face. And then there's another picture of a sad face. Comparing the 2 pictures of the sad face simply means that the machine finds the same pixel pattern in one image that the human said was a sad
But
face in the
Daniela,
other
just to
image.
amplify what he's saying, but we know that. It doesn't actually feel feelings, but it can mimic feelings. I mean, Spike Jonze's movie is about somebody falling in love with his Siri on his phone.
Well, it can mimic feelings in movies. And if you look at the reality, the reality is much more nuanced. Do
you agree, Mehran?
Well, so I think part of it is we ascribe meaning to things, right? When we watch a movie, different people come away with different impressions because we ascribe that meaning ourselves. That's one thing that AI is getting much better at, is basically having an interaction that we ascribe meaning to. Like, that's
Right.
the big thing about generative AI. It generates words and it generates pictures, which are exactly the things we give meaning to.
Right.
So it can certainly evoke emotional responses from human beings because we're the ones who create that
That
emotion.
can be
We're
manipulated.
the ones who create that meaning.
That can be manipulated.
And that can be manipulated, right? That's what misinformation is all about. How do I get people angry enough that they vote for the person I want them to vote for? Right, so that's the question that comes down to is assume that these technologies can do this stuff. What are the guardrails we put around it
Right.
that allows the human being to know that the emotions that are being generated by you are being generated by this thing, right? When we go to a movie, we don't come in there thinking, oh, I'm just going to sit here and have no emotional reaction. We want an emotional reaction, but at the same time, we realize that it's fake, that it's a movie, right? We don't necessarily realize that when we read something on social media.
Right.
So those are places where we say,
Right.
again, not rocket science, we just need to have some indication.
Thank you. Last question, then we have to let our guests go.
Hey, thanks for being here. And Daniela, I run a marketing consulting firm. And
What's your name?
Wes Morton for
Welcome.
Media and Tech. We just signed a robot fighting league, so we'd love to talk to you about that. My question is, what do you guys see as the frontiers of AI? We've talked a lot about the kind of complications and things. I'm curious to see your academic take on what's the next thing. What are you seeing in academia and how AI is being applied?
Thank you.
So I am excited about, so here are the frontiers. There are existing methods that are flawed, and people are working on fixing the flaws. There is the idea of generating new insights, coming up with new ideas about how intelligence works, and then there are applications. And there are frontiers in each of these 3 buckets. I'm especially excited about the new idea bucket and about connecting our work in artificial intelligence with neuroscience, about looking at the interplay between what we understand about nature and what we can code up in algorithms, how our insights about nature can lead to better ways of thinking about intelligence in machines, and how our results in machines can influence our discoveries in nature. And in fact, in my group, we are developing a new type of machine learning. We call it liquid networks. And the idea in liquid networks is that instead of doing this massive parallelization of how we learn, we have a much more sequential, contextual representation. And actually, this work is inspired by the brain of worms.
First of all, worms have brains?
Yeah, worms have neurons. A worm lives on 302 neurons, has a good life on 302 neurons. And interestingly, the function of each of these neurons has been mapped by biologists into biochemical reactions that can be represented with particular types of differential equations. And so if you bring those kind of ideas into the concept of a machine learning solution, you get a very different approach to how you think about intelligence than you get with a transformer architecture. And you get approaches that are provably safe, that are provably not hallucinating, that generalize, and that are compact. So there are, and this is not the only idea out there, but so I think that really thinking about new ways to build intelligence in machines, or at least predictive intelligence and generative intelligence in machines, is very exciting.
Last
Yeah,
word
I think
from Mehran?
Daniela is right that there's lots of different areas, and there's fundamental work being done in technology, but two of the application areas I'm particularly excited about are healthcare and education. I think healthcare, there's lots of opportunities to actually be able to do things like give people better health outcomes, allow them to live longer, allow them to live better lives, because we can analyze lots of data about things like what kinds of drugs have what kinds of impact on what people with what genomes, right, and really do something specialized. Same thing in education. If you think about how we do education now, by and large, it's basically the same way we did it 700 years ago in Bologna. There's a bunch of people who come sit in a room. There's one person at the front of the room who lectures for 50 minutes, and then that's what we call education. And there's so many opportunities to make that more specialized, to make it more customized, to really understand how people learn. One of the projects we work on is something we talk about is machine learning for human learning, so we can understand how do people learn, how can we improve that process, and really try to make strides toward how we basically get people to understand the world better.
Those are really great examples, and I just want to make the healthcare example a little bit concrete and tell you that because of machine learning, MIT scientists have discovered the first antibiotic, the first new antibiotic in 40 years. And so this kind of approach,
Wow.
you can imagine applying it to what I like to call individualized healthcare, where you can imagine sometime in the future, you go to the doctor and immediately a pill gets generated just for you on demand because of who you are, because of your circumstances, and because of your body. So I think that the
Amazing.
opportunities are extraordinary.
Yeah.
You know, with AI, we can truly tackle healthcare. We can begin to think about climate and how we can do to fix our planet. We can think about how we remove inequality and ensure sustainability. A lot of the major challenges that the world is facing today can be tackled and improved with the AI tools.
Well, thank you. We are really out of time, but thank you, Daniela. Mehran, thank you. Please join me in thanking our amazing guests.